If you've ever watched Ryan Coogler's Sinners, you might have had a sneak peek as to a film that has been in development for a long while. That is a Marvel project. Do you know what that film is? Also, seven-time champion of the Formula One sport, Lewis Hamilton, has warned against rushing into a sequel to the very successful F1 movie starring Brad Pitt and Damson Idris. And last but not the least, Ivory Coast is bent on becoming Africa's next film hub. Will they be able to achieve that? Well, we'll be taking a look at these stories and more right here on the Film Mandate. My name is Papa Otu. Stay tuned. Hello, welcome back to the Film Mandate, where I bring to you movie news, reviews, and reactions both from the African front and the international scene. Thank you for joining me for this episode right here on the Film Mandate. So, we'll be delving into the very first story. And for the very first story, those who have watched Ryan Coogler's Sinners, I'm sure enjoy the movie and the production design that graced the scene so beautifully that we can't stop talking about it, which has led to a very successful box office return. But for those who may not know, most of the costumes that you saw, particularly in the background, was from another movie that was in development in Marvel, and I'm talking about none other than the reboot of Blade, which is supposed to star Mashallah Ali, which has been in development hell for quite some time. And as it stands now, when they were about to enter into the production of Sinners, something interesting happened. And let's take a look at this story in Variety and see what it has to say. So, Sinners producer says costumes were purchased from Marvel's Blade reboot that ended up not shooting. They had a warehouse full of period appropriate clothes. And this is written by Jack Dunn. So, let's read the article. Sinners gave audiences a sneak peek at Marvel's Blade reboot without them even knowing. During a recent interview with Screen Crash, Sinners producer Seth Ohanian shared a fun Marvel Easter egg hidden in Ryan Coogler's vampire thriller. Ohanian revealed that costumes originally set for the highly anticipated Blade were repurposed for Sinners after the Marvel production hit a roadblock. Costume designer Ruth was working on the Blade movie that ended up not shooting, he explained. At one point, that movie was going to deal with, and she's talked about this before, but at one point, that film was going to deal with the past around the same era as Sinners. She happened to have a warehouse full of period appropriate clothes and was like, yo, we got to shoot this movie like tomorrow. And Marvel was generous enough and kind enough to let us basically purchase it at a price. Ohanian added that a lot of the background actors wore the clothes intended for Blade while the stars had original costumes. Sinners, which debuted on April 18th, is one of the major box office phenomena of 2025. An entirely original horror film released to a sea of IP fare. The film went on to gross a staggering $364 million worldwide. It is currently the eighth highest grossing film of 2025 and the only title in the top 10 not based on pre-existing IP. Marvel's Blade, first announced in 2019, has been in production limbo ever since. However, the film star Mahershala Ali recently told Variety that he remains ready to step into the role of the day-walking vampire hunter. Yeah, so this is quite interesting. What could have been should we have seen Marvel's Blade? And I think that would have been an interesting sight to have behold when it if it was made in the era, in the pre-colonial era sorry, not pre-colonial era, that, in the period piece that it was supposed to have been made in, similar to that of Sinners. And I'm saying this because for those who have watched Wesley Snipes' Blade, which was not necessary, which was not part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe as we have it now, it happened within the era in which it was shot in. So you're talking about the early 2000s, the late 1990s. I mean, the early 2000s in particular. And this is what it could have been. And unfortunately, because of current events happening in the Marvel Cinematic Universe as it is, this movie didn't end up shooting. It doesn't mean its Blade movie won't be shot. However, they've moved away from the era in which this could have been shot in. And looking at the fact that they had to repurpose this by selling it to the production of Sinners, it means that there's no way they'll be go visiting that area. Maybe they may do flashbacks if the need be, since I'm sure that Sinners production didn't acquire the entire wardrobe of Blade to shoot years. So it is quite an interesting development. What could have happened if we had seen what Marvel had for us with regards to Blade? And I'm even saying this based on the fact that if you look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe as a whole, I'm not sure we've gone so much back into the past to see what Marvel could have looked like outside what we saw in what's it called, Captain America. So we saw a little bit of Captain America in the World War II era. Would have been interesting to see what was happening perhaps in New York in the era of where Blade existed. Maybe I don't know whether maybe they could have gone further in the 1800s, but regardless, I mean, gone further in the 1800s and perhaps far, far beyond even that era. But regardless, it's unfortunate that we are not going to see this, and particularly looking at the fact that Sinners also is in the same genre as Blade is, or I mean was. We are looking at Blade being a horror vampire, character, definitely would inform that the film would go in that same genre. Maybe not as horror themed as you see Doctor Strange is, or Agatha, all along is, but in within that, his own vampire, pocket of the universe. So it would have been interesting to see how Mahershala Ali's character would have, felt like within that period piece. And unfortunately, that's not going to happen because Sinners has successfully been able to achieve that. But it's no fault of Sinners because Blade moved on from that period, era. So I'm sure, having moved on from that period era, it means that Blade is likely to shoot within the same timeline as the Avengers or the new Avengers and the other characters exist in this current 2000, maybe even 2025, and moving forward. So it would have been interesting to have seen what Marvel had for us with regards to Blade, but nonetheless, it is good that Sinners found a use for it, considering the fact that Ruth Carter also happened to be that is the costume designer for Sinners, also happened to be the one designing same for Blade. So she brought to bear her expertise and how useful the clothing in their warehouse is to Sinners. So I'm glad they found a use for those costumes. And with Carter, for those who may not know, also happened to be the costume designer for the Black Panther movies. So she has a lot of a vast experience in the field of costume designing. No wonder the costumes as we saw in Sinners were so spectacular and worked so well for the movie Sinners. So if you watch Sinners, then you would have seen, I'm sure you would have seen or had a sneak peek into what the whole Marvel Blade movie could have been. So if you haven't watched it, take a time to do so and enjoy the cinematic spectacle as to what Ram Kugler did with the story of Sinners, starring Michael B. Jordan and a host of other beautiful, wonderful, actors. So let me know your thoughts on this. What you think of this story, and what you think the Blade movie could have been like with the costumes that they had designed for it. So moving on from this story to the next, F1 is the next movie that we're going to talk about, and this has to do with the seven-time world champion Formula One driver Lewis Hamilton warning against rushing into a sequel to F1. And I'm glad that he has brought this up, because this indeed can be a challenge for a production when it's that successful. And as much as it's not done with this theatrical run, Apple has already declared it a box office hit compared to the number of films that they've put in the cinemas, and it's not performed well. However, there are already talks as to having a sequel to F1, just talks, but I'm sure it's likely that the wheels on it has already started moving. And let's find out what he has to say. So, F1. So, my browser seems to always be acting up. Yeah. So, yeah, so Lewis Hamilton. So this was published in the Associated Press website, and Lewis Hamilton warns against rushing an F1 movie sequel after box office success. So that's him in your short, and it's written by James Ellenworth. It reads that Silverstone, England, AP, Lewis Hamilton says he just wants to enjoy the F1 movie success, as he warned Thursday that rushing a sequel would be the worst thing we probably could do. The seven-time Formula One champion was an executive producer on the film, which stars Brad Pitt as a hard-bitten racer making a late career comeback. It became Apple's biggest box office hit, yet when it debuted with $55.6 million dollars in North American theaters and $144 million dollars globally over the weekend, according to studio estimates Sunday. We literally just finished it, so I think the last thing we want right now is a sequel, Hamilton said Thursday ahead of the British Grand Prix. It's been 4 years in the making. It was a lot of work, particularly for director Joseph Kosinski. It's time, it's time away from your family. It's time away from your kids, and also you need this to just simmer for a while. Like, let's enjoy it. I think the worst thing we probably could do is to rush into doing a sequel, the Ferrari driver added. Most sequels are way worse, and so we don't need to rush it. I think if we do a sequel, I would say let's really, really take our time in getting it even better, even better. So that is it. That is it. And I like what Lewis Hamilton just said, particularly that most sequels do far worse than the first in the installation of the franchise, if they are to go with the trilogy or whatnot. And I totally agree. They need to take their time, because just as he said, the F1 movie took 4 years to get it into fruition, meaning that a lot of research and a lot of things were done to prepare it properly for it to be made. And there's been several movies that have tanked with regards to their sequels as a result of perhaps rushing into it, or maybe they may not have rushed into it, but for some reason it didn't perform well as they hoped it would. When I mean, especially when they are picking it off from the first one, which might have done so well. And one clear example is Warner Brothers or DC's Joker, Folie Ado, which didn't perform well, particularly looking coming off Joker, which performed over $1 billion, and yet in the sequel, the story wasn't that strong, or what people expected of the sequel didn't really go down well with them, and word of mouth and the poor performance of the story led to a poor performance in the box office. So sequels, just as Lewis Hamilton has said, ought to be planned carefully and prepared adequately towards its shoot. And most people would expect that sequels to movies actually do better than the first installation. And that is what I think it should be, because if you pay attention to a lot of movies, there's going to be comparisons made between the first and the second. And I'm sure nobody wants that. You would want to go and watch the sequel and go like, wow, this is far better than the first. And I'm sure that is what Lewis Hamilton, who from his, comments, seems to be an avid, viewer of films, or a passionate, uh, or someone who enjoys films a lot, because for him to have made this comment means that he knows what he's talking about. Particularly him being as an executive producer, or even a producer on this movie, to consult and provide his expertise as a Formula One driver on this particular movie. So it does make sense, because you would want your sequel to be far better than what the first one did. And he spoke about the idea of, when shooting films or preparing towards shooting of a film, you end up spending time, chunks of time away from your family, from your kids, which indeed nobody wants to do so. But um, in making something worth it like that, you end up spending time away from your family. So the time even needed to spend with the family is also necessary. So him asking for this movie to simmer and let it end up in the consciousness and psyche of society does make sense. And most importantly, you want to do a better movie than this, and in that case it ends up sometimes taking, if not same amount of time to shoot a sequel, it may take very close to the same amount of time to shoot a sequel. Sometimes even more, because depending on the stakes involved in the second one that you want to highlight on, it may end up in that same vein. And you would want to make a sequel in the vein of like the Dark Knight Rises, or Francis Ford Coppola's Godfather 2, something that beats the first one, and makes people more excited even for a third one if there need be, for a complete trilogy. So I do agree with him that they ought to take their time, make sure that they have a very good, strong story for the sequel if there need be. And already ideas of a sequel has already been floated around and by the director Joseph Kosinski, who wants to cross over F1, with the Days of Thunder, which starred Tom Cruise. And it's something that he's, just thinking about, perhaps already has a draft towards it. But I'm sure whatever the case may be, Joseph Kosinski, who shot, the Top Gun Maverick, definitely would take his time to ensure that the best, they put their best foot forward, because Top Gun Maverick was really a powerful sequel to the first entry. And I'm sure that's what they are looking at, doing the F1, the sequel to F1, being a very powerful sequel to the very first entry in the F1, if I should call it maybe a universe. Yeah, so indeed, it's quite an interesting story, and I like the fact that Hamilton has called on letting the film simmer for a while, at least when it's completely done out of its, theatrical run, they can think about it further and know where to go with the story. So let me know what you think concerning this story. Do you share the same views as Lewis Hamilton? And let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. So moving on from the sites of Hollywood to Africa. Africa has a thriving, or a burgeoning cinematic or film industries all over the continent from the various countries, and one of such thriving industry is that of Ivory Coast, who is hell bent on becoming the next big African film hub aside Nollywood. And this was shared in a story by on a website called, is it 10 ABC 10 or ABC NBC? I'm not so sure. But yeah, this is the story that reads that Abidjan dreams of becoming Africa's next cinema hub. And this is written by Lucy de Petu. Pardon me, I'm not sure I'm getting the name right. So let's read. In the lush forest north of Abidjan, technicians were busy filming on the set of Le Testament, The Will, a comedy co-production between Ivory Coast, Burkina Faso, and Senegal. Under a large tree, village elders gathered to discuss the death of a wealthy cocoa planter in the film. His children return to their native village and bicker over his inheritance. Ivory Coast is hosting an increasing number of local, Pan African, and international productions and is striving to establish itself as a go to film destination in Africa in the face of long time dominance by Nigeria's thriving Nollywood. According to the Ivorian Culture Ministry, about 30 films and television series were shot in the country last year. This year, 39 other projects have been approved. Between takes of Le Testament, the production manager Shade uh, Koulibaly, 31, said there was a growing number of enthusiastic technicians and filmmakers. The sector's really developing locally, she told AFP. The new generation wants to tell stories about their daily life, stories that represent them. We have people who are able to oversee an entire production without needing to look elsewhere, added Adama Ruamba, the film's Burkinabe director, who has witnessed firsthand how the sector has professionalized soft power. Ivory Coast, the world's top cocoa grower and a regional economic powerhouse, is banking on its youth. Is banking on its youth. 75% of the population is under 35 to take its fledgling film sector to new heights. Koulibaly, however, said private investors were still cautious, and even though she received public funding, she had to fight to secure financing. The credibility of Ivorian cinema is building up bit by bit, but it's a struggle, she added. The commercial capital, Abidjan, has been the backdrop of Franco-Ivorian director Philippe Lacote, Lacote's productions since he began his career in 2022. Lacote just finished filming Clash, about rivalry between stars of the popular Coupe de Calais dance music in Abidjan and Congolese capital Kinshasa, using a predominantly Ivorian team. It would have been possible a few years ago, he said. It wouldn't have been possible a few years ago, he said. Ivory Coast Minister of Communication Amadou Koulibaly said the government was considering setting up specialized programs in schools and wants to train all players in the film sector locally. At a major international convention in Abidjan last month, he said he wanted to make Ivory Coast the hub of audiovisual content on the continent. And then the stakes are both economic and cultural, particularly with representations of Africa long dominated by Western countries. Earlier this year, Franco-Ivorian director Jean-Pascal Zadi shot part of his movie Le Grand Déplacement here, while El Dorado, a series by Franco-American film producer Alex Berger, was filmed in the lush tropical Banco forest near Abidjan. It's important for me to contribute to the development of Africa's cultural industry. We need to produce our own stories, quality content, said Zari, calling local cinema a form of soft power. His next film, an action movie, will also be shot in Ivory Coast. Vision Needed at the National Cinema Office, Adama Konkobu described 2024 as an exceptional year and estimated about 20 Ivorian films were screened. In stark contrast, Nollywood, Nigeria's massive and hugely popular film industry, released about 2,500. In 2024, Ivorian films made up for about 10% of screenings in the country and 6% of the box office. Meanwhile, films produced or co-produced in the United States accounted for 80% of the market share, according to the National Cinema Office. What's missing in the development of local cinema is a clear vision from the authorities, said Lacote, lamenting that the government is focusing on attracting foreign films without adequately financing Ivorian ones. It creates jobs, he said, but it doesn't develop national cinema. Koulibaly insisted the political will was there and highlighted a forthcoming subsidy mechanism aimed at young Ivorian talent. Another obstacle to the development of local film industry has been the country's lack of cinemas, with only 15 movie theaters, nearly all of them in Abidjan. A project to open a new cinema in Bouaké in Central Ivory Coast, and the arrival last year of Pathé Cinemas, a chain owned by a French film production and distribution company in Abidjan, could change the dynamic. So that's your story there of Ivory Coast or Abidjan dreaming of becoming Africa's next film or cinema hub. So this is it, another African country desiring to be, the hub of cinema in the on the continent. And indeed, it is a noble pursuit. I must say, it is a noble pursuit, and it looks like the world over, countries are propping up themselves to make sure that they attract or they be the best they can within the space of audiovisual, productions or the film industry, to be specific. And just as he said, most African countries, as a matter of fact, Ivory Coast seems to be the picture of a lot of film industries in most countries in Africa, and that is quite a challenge. Um, Scanty infrastructure, um, data not being available, not enough financing to help with the various aspects of the industry, and that has become a challenge that we are faced with daily with regards to the film industry or the audiovisual content or production industry as a whole. And this has been a challenge because not only do we have these challenges in the country, but we end up competing or being challenged by the import of foreign productions into the country, which most often than not takes up large chunks or percentage of, let's say, screen time, both in the cinemas and sometimes even on our television stations. And that is a challenge. So for Ivory Coast to desire to change the narrative on this is a noble adventure. And I hope indeed they succeed in that. But that would involve the inclusion or the deliberate actions of all parties involved, whether private or public. By public, making sure that the government creates the necessary avenue to attract the necessary investments, creating policies that would help foster the smooth running of these productions without a hitch, and making sure that everything is in place to help put certain infrastructure in place from the cinemas, to all the value chain, all the necessary institutions that ought to occupy the value chain to help this be possible. Because to have all cinemas centralized in the capital city of Ivory Coast doesn't augur well. A lot of movies can be shot, they can even desire to shoot as much as 2,500 movies, just as Nollywood have been doing. But the question here lies that where would these films be screened? That is the question. Where will this film be screened if after it's shot, there is no places to be, screened? That becomes a problem. You may desire to want to screen outside the country, but at the end of the day, their money that could have been made internally could be more beneficial to the country than that which can be made globally. I mean, globally would add more dollars or more money to whatever production being done, the box office revenue, but it can't survive without the what can be generated internally. So this indeed is a noble pursuit, and I like the fact that not only are they looking at internally creating all these, making this possible, but the idea of collaboration is important. They're collaborating with other two countries to make that a possibility. It's important. And I would always stress on the need that Africa, in as much as we are looking at building our own individual countries' industries, there is the need to pursue a continental forefront of a powerful, formidable industry that can compete with the West, with the East, Europe, and Middle East, and all that. Individual countries can't do this alone. Individual countries can't do this alone. And I'm hoping that in as much as we are desiring to build our individual industries, which is necessary, because that will form the foundation and the base upon which we can build a continental film industry, we need to have that picture in mind. We need to have that picture in mind. Can you imagine having a film being released in a cinema all across the continent rather than just in your own home country? So that is something that we need to pursue, and I hope that is what, in the near future, the governments all across Africa would make it a mandate to achieve such. So this sums up my third story for today's episode. Let me know your thoughts on this. Will Ivory Coast succeed? What do you think are some of the measures they ought to put in place to help achieve what they are desiring? And today being a Monday, obviously, I'm not going to end this episode like this. I'm definitely going to leave you with what is happening in the box office today. So, starting with the North American box office, we have the top 10 films that, I mean, more than top 10, but I only cover the top 10 for the purposes of this. And so you can go onto the Box Office Mojo website and check out the top 10 box office this past weekend. And at number one, releasing for the first time, is Jurassic World Rebirth. And it has made 91, sorry, not the first time. Yeah, for the first time or so. So $91.5 million. And the total is 147 million 304,630 dollars. And this has to do with some of this, what they call some of the markets having this film releasing some of the markets way earlier than the worldwide release. So that's why that accounts for the 147 million total. And number two, dropping from number one, is F1 the movie, which made 26 million and $60,000 into a total of 109,517,106 box office revenue. And number three, dropping from number two, is How to Train Your Dragon, which has made 11 million, and the total North American box office is revenue is 224 million and $615. And number four, dropping from number three, is Elio, which has made $5.7 million, and the total is 55 million 74,749 dollars. And number five, and still at the same spot from last week, is $4.6 million, and the total of $60,234,494. And number six from number four is Megan 2.0, which made 3.8 million, and a total of $18,550,035. Lilo and Stitch from number six has dropped to number seven, made 3.8 million, and the total of $408,520,147. And number eight from number seven is Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, made $3,280,120, and the total is $191,184,000. Materialist from number eight to number nine has made $1,346,704, and the total is 33,524,258. And number 10 is from number 9 is Ballerina, which made $725,000 into a total of $57,253,013. So this is your North American box office. And then let's see what the worldwide box office have for us this day. Yeah, so Yeah, so at the North America, so at the worldwide box office, the top 10 movies is as follows. So our number one still happens to be Neza 2, and the total is almost 2 billion, and that is 1,899,763,878 dollars. And number two, Lilo and Stitch has 972,720,147. So it has occupied the second spot, taking it away from a Minecraft movie, which is at 954,928,702 dollars. And number four is Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning with a total of $576,184,000. Number five, How to Train Your Dragon is 516,939,615 dollars. And number six is Captain America: Brave New World with 415,101,577 dollars. And number seven is Thunderbolts with 381,936,837 dollars. And number eight is Sinners with 364,878,498 dollars. And number nine, Jurassic World Rebirth at 318,317,630 dollars. And number 10, the last for this particular review is 400 is F1 the movie, which is at 293,000 sorry 293,617,106 dollars. So all too soon, I've come to the end of this particular episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you so much for joining me for this episode. I'll be coming your way tomorrow with another exciting episode of the Film Mandate. My name is Papa Otu. I'll see you soon.